You say there's nothing there, but what's staring back from the corner disagrees.
I wasn't supposed to be there. The pamphlet had arrived in an unmarked envelope, slipped under my door in the dead of night. It was glossy, with a picture of fireworks bursting over a crowd. The text was simple, almost too casual: the festival of eternity. One night only. A once-in-a-lifetime event. The strange part wasn't the delivery. Living in a tiny apartment complex in Cedar Ridge, Oregon, you learn to expect weird things. What unsettled me was the note, scrawled on the back in crimson ink. This is your invitation. Do not miss it. It was unsigned. I didn't recognize the handwriting, and my roommate, Jenny, swore it wasn't hers. We laughed it off, of course. Some guerrilla marketing ploy, Jenny had said, shrugging as she flipped through the mail. But I couldn't shake the unease. By the time the clock struck midnight, I'd decided not to go. That's when the lights in my apartment flickered, and my phone buzzed with a single, cryptic text from an unknown number. You'll regret it if you don't. I should probably tell you about myself. My name's Natalie, and my life, until that night, was painfully average. I worked the early shift at Brewhaven, a coffee shop tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. My days were a blur of steaming lattes, grumpy regulars, and scrubbing tables until my arms ached. Cedar Ridge wasn't exactly a hotspot for excitement. It was the kind of town where the highlight of your week was a half-price movie at the old theater downtown or a new food truck rolling into the farmer's market. Everyone knew everyone, or so I thought. On weekends, I'd hang out with Jenny, my best friend and roommate since college. She was the bold one, the life of every party. I was the wallflower, the quiet observer. She always teased me for being too cautious, too stuck in my routines. That Thursday night was supposed to be like any other. Jenny was out with her boyfriend, and I was curled up on the couch, binge-watching a true crime documentary and debating whether to eat the leftover pizza or order something new. Then came the envelope, the note, the text message. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But something about it gnawed at me, a mix of curiosity and dread I couldn't explain. By the time Jenny stumbled in at 2 a.m., I had almost convinced myself it was a prank. You're obsessing, she slurred, kicking off her heels. Let it go, Nat. It's probably some lame county fair or whatever. She had a point. Still, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the pamphlet on my nightstand until the first rays of dawn seeped through the blinds. The words seemed to glow in the dim light. Do not miss it. Here's the continuation of the story. I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just Jenny talking in her sleep. She did that sometimes, mumbling half-formed sentences about work or her endless string of bad dates. But as I rolled over, I realized the voice wasn't coming from her room, it was closer. Much closer. It was in my room. I sat up, my heart pounding, and scanned the shadows. The voice was faint, indistinct, like someone speaking from the other side of a thick wall. The words were impossible to make out, but the tone sent a shiver down my spine. Low, rhythmic, almost inviting. Jenny? I called, my voice trembling. No response. The whispering stopped. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand and turned on the flashlight. The pale beam swept across my room, illuminating nothing unusual, just the familiar clutter of half-read books, an empty mug, and the pamphlet. The pamphlet. It wasn't where I'd left it. When I'd gone to bed, it had been on the nightstand. Now it was on the floor, open to a page I hadn't seen before. My fingers shook as I picked it up. The glossy image was different, a darkened field under a blood-red moon, with silhouettes of people standing in a circle. Beneath it, in the same crimson ink as the note, were 3 words. "We're waiting, Natalie." I barely slept after that. The next morning, Cedar Ridge felt off. The streets were quieter than usual. Even the regulars at Brewhaven seemed subdued, their conversations muted as though they were all in on some secret. I tried to chalk it up to my lack of sleep, but I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were on me wherever I went. Around noon, things took another strange turn. An elderly man, one of our regulars, handed me his usual order, a black coffee with 2 sugars. As I rang him up, he leaned in close, his pale blue eyes locking onto mine. "You're going tonight, aren't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My stomach churned. "Excuse me?" "The festival," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You've been invited." "It's an honor, you know." I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, forcing a laugh. He just smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. "You'll see," he murmured, turning to leave. "We all will." I tried to focus on my shift, but my mind kept wandering back to his words. How did he know about the invitation? About the pamphlet? By the time I got home, the unease had grown into full-blown paranoia. Jenny was gone, probably out with her boyfriend again, and the apartment felt suffocatingly empty. The pamphlet was still on my nightstand, its crimson ink glaring up at me. I debated throwing it away, but something stopped me. A pull I couldn't explain, as though the words on the page had hooked into my brain. I was about to call Jenny when the lights flickered. It was just for a second, but in that moment, I saw something, or someone, standing in the hallway. A tall figure, its features obscured by the flickering shadows. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, gripping my phone like a lifeline. When the light steadied, the figure was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but my pulse didn't slow. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and kept every light in the apartment on. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second dragging into an eternity. By midnight, I was ready to call Jenny and beg her to come home, but before I could dial, my phone buzzed. It was another message from the unknown number. Almost time. The air felt heavier, the silence oppressive. I turned on the TV for background noise, but every channel was static. Even the streaming apps refused to load, their error messages flickering on the screen like taunts. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps at the door, each one louder than the last. I didn't move. I couldn't. Another knock, this time slower, deliberate, like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew I was too scared to answer. "Natalie," a voice called, muffled but unmistakable. It sounded like Jenny. Relief flooded through me as I rushed to the door. "Jenny? Where have you been?" I was freaking out. But as I reached for the handle, something made me stop. The voice called again, softer this time. "Natalie, let me in." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Something was wrong. The tone was off, too flat, too controlled. It sounded like Jenny, but not quite. I leaned closer to the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the fisheye lens, I saw her, or someone who looked like her. She was standing perfectly still, her face expressionless. Her eyes didn't blink. "Natalie," she said again, her mouth moving in sync with the words, but her voice was hollow, like a recording. "Let me in." Here's the continuation of the story. I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away, my pulse racing, and grabbed the closest thing I could find, a lamp. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. My mind reeled as I stared at the unmoving figure, through the peephole. Jenny, or whatever it was, called again. "Natalie, it's me. Open the door. You're safe." Safe. That word echoed in my head, mocking me. I inched toward my phone, ready to call the police, when the voice outside changed. The tone shifted, becoming deeper, guttural, as though it was being dragged across gravel. "You can't run from this," it growled. "You've been chosen." Chosen. The pamphlet. The invitation. I felt a wave of nausea as the pieces started to click into place. The festival wasn't just a local event, it was something much darker, much older. Something I was now a part of. The figure outside knocked again, harder this time, and the doorframe rattled. My survival instincts kicked in, and I bolted for my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it and shoved a dresser in front of it, for good measure. Then I noticed the pamphlet lying on my bed, open to another page I hadn't seen before. It was a map. A trail led from the center of Cedar Ridge to a clearing in the woods, marked with an ominous red X. Beneath it were more words in that same crimson ink. "Your time is now. Follow the path." As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text but a video. Against my better judgment, I tapped play. The screen showed the same clearing from the map, lit by the eerie glow of torches. Figures in long, tattered robes stood in a circle, their faces obscured. In the center was something wrong. It was hard to describe, like the air itself was bending around it. A shifting, pulsating mass of shadows and light that made my stomach churn just looking at it. Then the camera panned to someone else, me. I was standing at the edge of the circle, watching. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. How could that be possible? I was here, in my bedroom, not out in the woods. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room. They were coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once, weaving through my thoughts like smoke. One voice rose above the others, clear and commanding. "Come to us, Natalie. The festival awaits." The room went dark. Not the normal kind of darkness, but an all-consuming void that seemed to swallow the air itself. I couldn't see, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. I was no longer in my room. I stood in the clearing from the map, surrounded by towering trees and the flickering glow of torches. The figures in robes were there, their heads turning in unison, to face me. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as though the earth itself had claimed me. The figure at the center of the circle began to shift, rising higher. Its form was impossible, constantly changing, limbs where there shouldn't be limbs, eyes that blinked and vanished. It radiated a cold so intense it burned. A voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. "Welcome, Natalie. You are the final piece." The robed figures chanted in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising in a frenzied crescendo. The thing at the center pulsed with light, each burst sending waves of nausea through me. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice barely audible over the din. "Your choice," the voice replied. A shape emerged from the shadows, Jenny. Or at least, it looked like her. She stepped forward, her face calm, but her eyes pleading. "You can stay," the voice continued, "and join us. Or you can leave, but only one of you will." Jenny's expression twisted into fear. "Natalie, please," she whispered. "You have to save me. I don't know how I got here, but they'll kill me if you don't." The chanting grew louder, the air thick with tension. "Choose," the voice roared, shaking the ground beneath us. I looked at Jenny, at the terror in her eyes, and felt a pang of guilt. She was my best friend, the one person who had always been there for me. But something didn't add up. "How do I know it's really you?" I asked. She hesitated, and in that moment, I saw it, the faintest flicker of something behind her eyes, something not human. "No, I whispered, stepping back. You're not her. The robed figures stopped chanting. The clearing went silent, the air electric with anticipation. Jenny, or the thing pretending to be her, smiled, a cold, predatory grin. Smart girl, it hissed, its voice warping. The thing lunged at me, but before it could reach me, the ground beneath it opened up, swallowing it whole. The shadows at the center of the circle surged, and the robed figures knelt, their faces obscured as the light grew brighter and brighter. And then I woke up. I was back in my room, the morning sun streaming through the blinds. The pamphlet was gone, and my phone lay on the floor, its screen cracked but blank. Was it a dream? A hallucination? I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew better. The festival wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days after the festival passed in a haze. I went through the motions of my routine, work, errands, the occasional forced small talk with Jenny, but everything felt wrong. Like I was living in someone else's skin, moving through a life that wasn't mine. Jenny acted like nothing had happened, laughing at memes on her phone and complaining about her boyfriend. She didn't mention the festival, the knocking at my door, or the figure that had pretended to be her. But I couldn't forget. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, some vivid hallucination born from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing, the robed figures, and that impossible, shifting mass at the center of it all. And then, the strange things began to happen. It started small, missing items, like my favorite mug or the sweater I always left on the couch. Jenny swore she hadn't moved them, and I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was misplacing things. Then the lights in the apartment began flickering, the same way they had that night. I called the landlord, but he said there were no issues with the wiring. One morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom. They weren't mine, or Jenny's. I began avoiding mirrors. I didn't know why, but every time I caught my reflection, something felt off. The way it moved, the way it held my gaze too long. And then, one day, I noticed something that stopped me cold. In every photo on my phone, no matter where or when it had been taken, there was a shadowy figure in the background. Sometimes it was barely visible, just a blur at the edge of the frame. Other times, it was unmistakable, a tall, hooded figure, watching me. I showed Jenny, but she just laughed it off. "You've been watching too many horror movies," she said. I didn't press her. Deep down, I knew she wouldn't, or couldn't, understand. A week after the festival, I got another text from the unknown number. "It's time to come home." My stomach turned. Home? What did that mean? Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again, this time with a photo. It was my apartment, taken from the street outside. The lights were on, and through the window, I could see two figures, Jenny and me. Except I wasn't home. I was standing in the middle of Cedar Ridge Park, staring at my phone. My blood ran cold as I stared at the image, my mind racing. How was this possible? Who was in my apartment? I ran. By the time I reached the apartment, my lungs were burning, and my hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys. I threw open the door and found nothing. The apartment was empty. The lights were off, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. No figures, no signs of life. But something was different. The air felt heavier, and the faint smell of smoke lingered, as though something had burned here. I checked every room, but it was just me. Or so I thought. As I stepped into my bedroom, I froze. The mirror above my dresser wasn't reflecting the room. Instead, it showed the clearing from the festival. The robed figures stood in their circle, motionless, their faces obscured. At the center was the shifting mass of shadows and light, pulsing like a heartbeat. And standing at the edge of the circle was me. The reflection moved. At first, it mirrored my movements, raising a hand, tilting my head. But then it stopped and smiled. Not a friendly smile, but something cold and predatory. Its lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The reflection's smile widened. And then it answered, not with words, but with memories. Flashes of images filled my mind, moments I didn't remember living. A childhood that wasn't mine. A life that felt foreign, yet familiar. I stumbled back, clutching my head as the realization hit me. I wasn't Natalie. I was the shadow. The truth unraveled in horrifying clarity. The festival wasn't just an event, it was a ritual. A trade. The people invited were offered a choice: stay in their world or take someone else's place in ours. I hadn't escaped that night. I'd chosen to leave. But the festival wasn't done with me. The shadowy figures, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, they were all reminders of my bargain. I didn't belong here, not in this version of reality. And the festival wanted me back. The mirror shimmered, and my reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. "You can't hide forever," it whispered, its voice echoing in my head. The room around me began to dissolve, the walls melting into darkness. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The last thing I saw before the shadows claimed me was the reflection's smile, and its final words burned into my mind. "You'll come home eventually. They always do." When I woke up, I was back in the clearing. The robed figures surrounded me, chanting, their voices rising into the night. And at the center, the shifting mass pulsed, waiting for its final piece. Waiting for me.